Right on cue. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to also welcome you all here to Queensland Art Gallery, Gallery of Modern Art. We're here in GOMA Cinema A, and welcome our 5 schools that are joining us. So Southern Cross Catholic College from Scarborough, Byron Bay High, Mount Alvernia College, Westside Christian College in Goodna, and Brisbane Grammar School. I'd also like to welcome any schools that are joining us via live stream. This is our second Q&A for secondary schools, where secondary school students can ask a curator about a particular exhibition that we have on display at QAGOMA. And today's exhibition that we're focusing in on is Cindy Sherman. And today we're joined by Ellie Buttrose, the curator of the Cindy Sherman exhibition. And we have fielded a number of questions, I think 8 in total. We may be able to get through some more in relation to the Cindy Sherman exhibition. This event largely began by QAGOMA Learning, which is the education team that puts on this event, deciding that we need to hear more from young people, young school students, and that we don't always feel like it's the right approach to just be asking students questions, but instead that we'd like to hear the questions from you and establish an opportunity for us to answer your questions. So the opportunity to get your questions that we have selected from in itself is a really exciting prospect for us. And we thank all of those students who've put questions forward. We have selected from that cross-section of questions a range of questions that we feel represents the spirit of the majority of the questions that were put in, so that hopefully, whether you get to ask your question today or not, part of your question can be answered through this discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to kick things off. We've got 45 minutes to cram in a lot of content, so we'll get straight into it with a question from Ashley Seal from Mount Alvernia College.
Hi, Ashley Seal, Mount Alvernia College, grade 10. My question is, why does Cindy Sherman only use herself as a model in her artwork?
So Cindy started using photography when she was at university, and she said she kind of knew the images that she wanted to create, but she didn't know how to describe them. And so how do you work with a model if you can't describe what you want yourself? So it was kind of just through sheer practicality that she used herself. Also, when you're a young artist, you can't pay models, so using yourself is free. And also, she could work in her studio for long hours or at all times of night when she found inspiration. And so it's those kind of the flexibility and sheer practicality as a young artist is what started it. But then the things that she was able to do and draw on by using herself as the model meant that she continued to do that. But there is a period in the late 80s and 90s where she does remove herself from her works and starts using just props. But then again, you see in this exhibition here in 2000, she returns to using herself as the model and stays with that over the coming decades. So thanks for the good question.
Okay, so next question we have from Brianna McAuliffe from Westside Christian College.
Hi, I'm Brianna. I'm in Year 10 and I go to Westside Christian College. My question is, does Sherman actually challenge or reinforce gender roles through her images?
This is an interesting question, and it came up in the early stages of Sherman's career, and it really divided feminists who were writing on her practice at the time, because some felt that because Sherman uses imagery that's already out there in the world, she's drawing from pop culture, from television, from movies, and representing those. Does she reinforce that imagery by representing it, or does her inhabiting those roles and putting it in an art museum and asking people to look and consider what these images mean, is that critical enough? And I think it's a good question, and it's a question that's continued to be asked of Sherman's work, even in her more recent series that kind of look at older women and the way they're represented in society. So I don't have a definitive answer for you, because I think Sherman's asking that question of every single viewer that comes through the exhibition.
And to that comment and that question, well, the first two questions, I think they're great questions to start with, because of this forum that we're in, a Q&A. Sherman's work does lend itself quite well to asking questions and not feeling like you have to have the right answer. So I feel those two questions are a great way for us to kick things off. So thank you to those two students. And we'll now go further into the questioning with Michael Mason from Brisbane Grammar School. Thank you, Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael Mason, and I go to Brisbane Grammar School in Year 12. And so my question is there a risk for the audience to be shocked through heavy irony and the overtly grotesque to the point that her message, critical of society, is misrepresented?
So this is a really interesting, because Sherman, she does all her makeup, chooses all her costumes. So not only is she the photographer, but she's also the kind of makeup artist and the set designer, and she's been well known for kind of using her very theatrical makeup, which you can see on screen now. The thing is that in a way, yes, she's kind of focused on the kind of, as you say, overly ironic, and yet some would say that she's actually very truthful to what we see day to day in the street. So is it her interest in the grotesque, or is it actually that people present themselves like this, that she's just being as truthful to reality as she sees? I think for me, there's two things that are going on. She kind of picks out those small moments where people get it wrong, so to say. You yourself might find yourself looking in the mirror and kind of catching yourself thinking, oh, I thought this looked good this morning, but now I'm out on the street, it doesn't seem as good an idea. And I think she picks up those moments because they're often the moments that we feel, or you might even see other people point at someone on the street having that moment. So in a way, it's kind of a focus on the overly grotesque, and it's also a focus on what's out there in the world. But I think it's also about that moment of rupture, and this idea of a moment of rupture was very popular in kind of philosophy at the time, that you really needed to kind of shake someone in order for them to see reality. And so in a way, I think Sherman works in that way a slight bit as well. So thanks for your question.
Just to jump in on that question and add to that question, I think something that we tried to convey in our resource for secondary students was taken from one of your comments in the catalogue, Ellie, and that is that Sherman is funny. And I think we sort of floated into that point in your answer to Michael's question. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit more for the students in the room.
I mean, I think the reason Sherman's artworks are so popular and have continued to be so popular is because she is also deeply empathetic to her characters. And so this kind of irony or humour is not poking fun at someone, but it's because she understands what it's like to have that moment. And I mean, it's also this thing of going back to why does she use herself? Well, you can play these kind of funny characters if it's you performing. Whereas I think if she was to use a model, they might not come off with the humour that we see in the imagery, that because it's her playing the character, we can find that humour because she's not poking fun at someone else. I mean, also to say that she doesn't see these as portraits. For her, they are very much about characters, and she walks into a room of her own work and talks about the people on the wall and the different characters. She doesn't see herself represented.
So a nice segue then into the question of representation, and that's something that comes up in art classrooms all the time. The challenge of students putting themselves into artworks is one that you may want to address in your own practice at some point, but also the challenge of making light of yourself through your artwork is something that maybe we can draw some inspiration from in Sherman's practice. So the next question, as I said, flows nicely into that exploration of representation, and the question comes from another Brisbane Grammar School student, Lincoln Thu.
Hi, I'm Lincoln Thu. I'm from Brisbane Grammar School in grade 12. My question is, are there any particular popular culture figures from past or present that Cindy Sherman bases her work on?
So Cindy, when she first started in the late 70s, did this body of work called the Untitled Film Stills that, if you've Googled her once, will pop up, in which she plays these characters from 1950s films or film noir and set them kind of around New York or places in LA, and they look like they're from a movie that you've seen. But as soon as you try and pinpoint what movie it is, you can't put your name on it, because Cindy's always using multiple reference points. And so for her new body of work, she was looking very much at Weimar or German cinema in the 1920s, and also Hollywood cinema in the 1920s, and how this was kind of seen as the golden age of screen culture, but also there was amazing roles for women, really interesting dramatic roles that talked about women's issues and really had kind of gutsy storylines in a way that you don't see now. And so when you see this latest body of work in the final part of the exhibition, if you are familiar with that period of film, you will also kind of think, oh, that looks so familiar, or that looks like a very particular actress. And yet, when you try and put, or you name that thing, you go, oh, but it's not actually for these reasons, it actually looks like someone else. And so I think Cindy's really great at synthesizing what's happening in pop culture and bringing those together. Because if she was just to represent one particular pop figure, then you would just only see it in relation to that figure. You wouldn't think about the kind of broader context of what does that moment in popular culture mean? What are the kind of socio-political implications of these types of characters? So it's never about the singular, it's always about the type, and how when you walk around in your everyday life, you often typecast people, and why do we do that, and what function does that have?
So to draw on that reference to popular culture, and another thread that exists in this particular exhibition and through Sherman's practice more broadly is fashion. So in terms of popular culture, not so much of one identity, can you speak a little bit to the ideas of fashion within Cindy's work?
Yeah, so she's done a number of collaborations with major fashion houses and magazines. And in our exhibition, we have two collaborations, one with Chanel, which you see on screen, and then the other one with Balenciaga. So Sherman has done a number of spreads in magazines as well, and she has this love-hate relationship with the fashion industry. Of course, as someone who dresses up as part of her job, she loves this idea of the way that every day we get into character when we put on outfits, and fashion allows us to become someone else. But it also has very negative impacts on our body image. So she's very torn as someone who loves the fashion industry, but is also very critical of the way it makes people feel. And I think this is something that many of us feel. How do you be a good feminist and also enjoy the fashion industry? And so for the Balenciaga series, she was invited by Vogue magazine to do a spread of the latest dresses by Balenciaga. But she also went out of her way to change the type of image that you normally see when you flip through a fashion magazine. And so she kind of made these quote-unquote ugly fashion images where you have these kind of garish middle-aged women who are perhaps, they're the people who can afford to wear the outfits, but they're not the models that you see on the runway. And it really kind of stops you as you look through this magazine, because you realise, oh, we've been so kind of accustomed to finding a certain type of image or a certain type of woman when we look through magazines. And here are these kind of older women out having fun and kind of hoping to be seen, bang in the middle of this fashion magazine.
Okay, so next question coming from Westside Christian College. Marlene Morales, if you're able to pop up.
Hello, my name is Marlene Morales. I'm from Westside Christian College, and I present my statement. When I look at some of Sherman's work, I feel like I actually don't know what the photographed figures, are thinking. I keep staring without a purpose. I just stare.
Can we also ask up Megan, also from Westside Christian College? We're joining these two statements together, and it's great to get a couple of statements in rather than questions, because they're really tapping into what it feels like to be looking at Sherman's work. So over to you. Thanks, Megan.
I feel like Sherman is faking smiles so not to appear empty, but the end result is still emptiness.
So I think it takes a great artwork to stop you and make you stare. I think there's, some statistic about us only spending a number of seconds in front of most artwork. So I think the fact that Cindy's works do that says a lot about her practice. And I think it's that thing of, if you knew exactly what the characters were thinking, would you stare at them, or would you just walk past because you get it? And then you move on to the next one. Actually, that ambiguity is something that she creates and thinks about quite a lot, and that you have to sit there and perhaps say, well, who is she? I look for all the cues in her outfits and her makeup. What's her background? What are her aspirations that I might be able to see from the way she presents herself in the world? And I think those sorts of things that ambiguity leaves you to question, makes for a better work, and that's what she's trying to do. There's that sense that these people could have many stories behind them, and you have to choose one, and you have to make one up yourself to take from that. And so I think that's the interesting part about Sherman's work, is she's not telling you whether this is a good person or a bad person or a beautiful person or an ugly person. She's asking you, well, what do you think of these people, and why do they present themselves this way, and how do you present yourself, and why do you make different choices from them?
So on the point of ambiguity, just given that there are students in the room that are joining us, and I myself, having been an art teacher for a good 10 years or so, find that concept of ambiguity one that is sometimes just being introduced to senior school students. So wondering if perhaps, whether it's in relation to Sherman's practice or contemporary art more broadly, if we could kind of unpack that concept of ambiguity for the students.
Well, Sherman's work draws on popular imagery. She talks about that she's one of the first generations to be raised with TV and kind of constant advertising. And so in these mediums, you're constantly being told what to think and why to think it, and an image is always paired with a text to sell something. But what if you take those kind of ways of presenting imagery away, and not being told what to think or how to react or what to desire? I think that's part of what Sherman's work is about. And
So I think, that's an interesting concept to apply in theory, but also to apply in making. And I guess we're really wanting to focus in on Sherman's work for students, because a lot of what we're discussing here has got to do with the things that you know so well in terms of popular culture and how image saturation is a part of the sort of adolescent teenage experience. But also then when you as artists and creative people try to respond through your own expression and your own creativity and your own artwork, do you jump to just using a Google image of a celebrity, or do you take a photo of yourself dressed up as someone? Do you take away the advertising when you're trying to make a statement about advertising? So I think that point about ambiguity is one that I'd really encourage you to explore with your fellow students and your teachers, because visual culture oftentimes is loaded with ambiguity that we can unpack and reconstruct and play with. So, thank you again for those two statements that were very much about feeling and looking at artwork, because that is what we are here to discuss, and that's why art galleries exist. And I know many of you have been into the exhibition today and may be able to resonate that little bit further. I know for myself that when I had been exploring the Sherman's practice through a digital screen, but then in going to the exhibition and seeing the works up close, the feeling was, intensified by looking very closely at that artwork. And also in terms of course, the layout of the exhibition space itself. So I wonder if we could elaborate a little bit more on that, and I think the next question's an ideal way to do exactly that. Because this event is largely about young students not only thinking about the artist in focus and the artworks in focus, but having an opportunity to ask a curator like Ellie about that process of going from thinking about imagery via email and online to actually getting the works in and up on the wall. So that said, can I ask Vikram Naker from Brisbane Grammar School to come up and ask the next question.
Hi, I'm Vikram Naika from Brisbane Grammar School and I'm in grade 12. Is there a reason why the murals artworks were on very tall walls rather than on a frame like a majority of the other works?
So I think this is a good question in relation to our particular exhibition on Cindy Sherman, because there have been many exhibitions, but ours focuses on that period of her work from 2000 onwards. And as I mentioned, it's about when she returns as the model in her work, but it's also about her engagement with digital technologies. And so we see her using Photoshop and digital backgrounds, but also she, as technology changes, her practice changes. And so you couldn't get beautifully high resolution digital prints like this until quite recently. And so technology has allowed her to do this. You also see the way in the scale of the exhibition changes. So the first set of portraits are quite small, but her works get larger and larger as you move through. And these are the largest ones, and the maximum height is 5 meters high. And also, I think it's, when do you see large women represented? We're used to seeing big pictures of men all the time, but you rarely see women kind of writ so large. And also, I'm interested in the types of women that Cindy chose. There's a lot of very glamorous imagery throughout the exhibition, but the largest people in the room are kind of, perhaps you might say, on the dowdy side. And so it's interesting that she's chosen very everyday figures to be 5 meters high, these kind of towering figures, because the way they present themselves in the world isn't towering or doesn't kind of, it's not majestic in any way. And so there's this interesting thing that she's done here between the kind of the content and the form. And she's drawing your attention to that. Why? We're used to seeing very glamorous people on billboards, but you would rarely see someone who's recently broken their foot and is in their kind of Sunday dress on a big billboard like that.
So 2 points there that I think for students you can reflect on, and the two-part answer to the question is looking at the technical and what we can now do with the digital, and you don't have to be, you know, a contemporary artist of significant note or working for a major advertising organisation to be able to construct a digital image at a high enough resolution and then order it to be printed at whatever scale you want, however small or however big. And I guess the second point is about that idea of, you know, the gender messaging that can be communicated through blowing up that scale, taking the sort of everyday idea and then blowing that up to be becoming something that's really significant. And, you know, you could in your own practice look at that in the reverse order of things as well, taking massive concepts and reversing them and shrinking them down, or whatever opposition you want to play with. So we're getting through in record time, which is good in the sense that we'll be able to actually explore some further questions. So wondering if the learning staff can locate some of the folk who've popped in some support questions. But if not, it'd be great. We've got some roaming mics to break out to have some open-ended conversations. But the next question is coming from Campbell Jones, Brisbane Grammar School. So if you could pop up, Campbell.
Hey, I'm Campbell Jones from Brisbane Grammar School. I'm in grade 12, and my question is, where do you think Cindy's interest in terrifying and sometimes disgusting imagery is born from? What internal or what external factors do you think have contributed to this drastic and sometimes confronting form of visual literacy? Thank you.
So Sherman has an interest in horror films. It's something that she grew up watching. She even made one herself in the 90s that we screened here as part of the opening weekend. And I think her interest does reflect popular culture, so we are used to seeing kind of quite terrifying and disgusting imagery in our everyday life, that the content of films and television shows provide this. So she draws on that, but it's also her interest in kind of looking at the edges of society, or the people who kind of push what we consider our norms. And so she did this series of works in which she kind of dressed up as a clown. And they're very dark images, and I mean the clown holds this kind of special role in society in that it's supposed to be this kind of person that you're willing to bring into your kind of 4-year-old's birthday party, but there's all these kind of strange stories about clowns, and many people hold very dark fears about clowns. And I know that just working on this exhibition, every time I kind of brought these clown images out, people would kind of tell me their childhood traumas about clowns. And so it's an interest in the kind of terrifying and disgusting, and yet, but in a way it's very everyday. These are people who just put on makeup to inhabit these characters, and I think everyone has a relationship with a clown, something that we're all quite familiar with, but the clown holds this kind of knife edge on kind of being something that we're supposed to enjoy. Everyone's got an experience of going to a circus, and yet there's all these kind of dark, brooding stories about clowns. And I think Sherman's quite interested in where that kind of the everyday slips over into the kind of dark and horror, because I think that still comes through in her imagery of women as well, is that where do you go from being everyday into slipping into something out of a kind of horror film.
So we have 2 questions that we can go to if we can find those students with the roaming mics. So Sophie Day, oh, you're both at the front, excellent. So Sophie, are you able to come up now and ask your question?
Hello, I'm Sophie Day from Westside Christian College. My question is, how important are the props in emphasizing and reinforcing gender roles and identity in her images?
So I think these things are vital to Sherman's work, and as I mentioned, she herself puts all these props together and sources all the outfits. She said the only time that her assistant was allowed to source something was actually in the clown series, and that's because they are quite generic. Everything else she sources herself, and the backgrounds, she takes these images herself and then inserts them after kind of photographing herself in the studio on a green screen. Then she inserts the image she has taken herself. And I think all those things come together to give us clues and signs and symbols about class, about where this person sits in society and where they hope to be in society or where they'd like to move up from. And so I think, yeah, these are fundamental, and they've become much more important. I think the backgrounds have become much more important in Sherman's work after 2000, and so that's part of what the exhibition is trying to show, the way that they become more elaborate. They also reinforce a kind of psychological state of the character. There's a kind of sense that sometimes there might be a reality or a dream, or sometimes an internal image of the character. But also, I think she's also talking about the way all images are always framed or made. Even if we're looking through a newspaper and we see a documentary image, that's being framed in a certain way to say a certain thing. Every image we see has a kind of a political stance on the world, no matter how banal. And so in her kind of props and her background images, there's always hints that they're fake. So she uses Photoshop to make some images look like they've been painted. She wants it to look real enough so that when you approach it, you think, oh, okay, what is this image? But then as you get closer, you see that it's kind of been tampered with. And that is also true of the way that she makes the makeup really obvious. It's a way of saying that everything, every image, or when you see people put themselves forward, that's a created image, that's a created personality, and we can't forget that.
Next question flows nicely off that the last one in that it's exploring costuming. So Thomas Allison from Brisbane Grammar School.
Hi, I'm Tom Allison and I'm from Brisbane Grammar School and I'm in grade 12. And my question is, does Miss Sherman ever give the option of displaying her costumes in the gallery space? If not, why do you think this is?
So Sherman doesn't always keep the costumes after she's done a body of work. I mean, often she'll source some clothes quite early on, so it may be a number of years until she uses that item, but she tends not to hang on to them because that becomes part of one character and she's not going to do the same character twice. So she doesn't have the archive from which you could show these items. But more than that, for her it's about the way that ensemble is put together. That if you took a particular dress or jacket, you could theoretically make a whole different character. And so it's about the combination of the clothes, the jewellery, the hair, the wigs, that make a particular character and say a certain thing. So the object by itself functions very differently than it does in the photo that Sherman uses it for. And also, we shouldn't forget that Sherman's a conceptual photographer, and by that I mean that, there's lots of photographers out there who are very technically astute, in all the very fine details. She says she's not she wasn't a particularly good photographer when she started out, and for her it was photography was used to convey an idea. And it's all about the conveying an idea. So photography is just a way to get a point across, that she could theoretically have done this as a painter, but that costume becomes part of that concept and that idea. So for her, that's the key point in her artwork.
Okay, so all of the set questions I guess we've worked through, and on that note, we'll end our live stream at that point.